What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast on the road. I'm your host, Van Jackson. I'm at Wellington Harbor in New Zealand on my way to work. The sunrise was gorgeous, and I was contemplating some shit, so I thought I would kind of share. So I want to synthesize a lot of different bits in the news about Trump's global tariffs regime, the sort of China threat boogeyman and where all this is going, markets crashing and then rebounding, and then the oligarchs buying the dip, buying low, which is very predictable. So I want to talk through all of that. And the first thing to note, though, is that I was actually supposed to go to the US in 3 weeks. I had a conference at Brown University. I had a big event at Yale University with a bunch of hot shit IR scholars. And it's I don't get to go to the Ivy Leagues very often. I've had very little contact with the Ivy League in my career. And so this was kind of a good opportunity. And I've got the book to promote, of course, The Rivalry Peril. And then I had a bunch of DC shit I was going to do. And none of that shit's happening now. It's not only because of world events, but I am the risk. I was advised by several people who are much more sort of legally minded than me that I shouldn't go. And if I do go, because of all the immigration stuff and who they're stopping at the border, basically anybody who's a critic of the regime, which I fit the bill. I have protected status in certain ways because I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a veteran, That's a protected class in America. But they're, even for citizens in the border, I've said this in a previous episode, they don't have the same rights when they're at the border. It's a space of exception. So it's I was advised legally, if I go, I need to be bringing burners. I need to be not bringing my normal devices. I need to be wiping my devices as much as possible. It's a huge fucking headache, And then I saw the Supreme Court decision just out. Justice Sotomayor, in her dissenting opinion, she literally said that based on the ruling of the court, it would now be constitutionally legal for Trump to deport U.S. citizens, okay, which is unprecedented, brave new world in the worst kind of fucking way. And this is, of course, happening and that's in her dissenting opinion. That's a Supreme Court justice, dude. And that's happening in the context of Trump himself on the record saying that he would like to deport U.S. citizens, and that they're looking into it. The White House press secretary confirmed they're looking into it.
Over the weekend, President Trump said that he would be willing to have U.S. citizens deported to El Salvador with the cooperation of President Bukele. How would that work legally, and how many people would potentially be available for that operation?
So the president has discussed this idea quite a few times publicly. He's also discussed it privately. You're referring to the president's idea for American citizens to potentially be deported.
Right. They're working through the process of how they can legally justify this and what the mechanics of that would be, and probably what are their superficial, ever-shifting criteria for deporting U.S. citizens. But this is some fascist shit. You know what I mean? And it's not clear, my conference travel stuff was supposed to be in May. Everything is moving so fast. It's not clear where we're going to be a month from now, because even people who screamed fascism about Trump were not expecting us to be here so quickly in April. The acceleration of things, the 10 executive orders every day shit, the just doing stuff and defying the courts shit, right? So, and I should say, it's not just fear of, being sent to El Salvador prison. That's not the only thing going on in my head. Matt Duss, my co-host, went to Taiwan a week or two ago, and he was totally fine. He came in and out without incident. So you can get in and out without incident, but what's the marginal risk? What's the gain? How much hassle are you going to have to go through? Just logistics, the 20-hour flight from fucking New Zealand to New York is insane. And I have teaching obligations. There was all kinds of stuff going on. So it wasn't just the Trump shit. But basically, I'm not coming to the US now. Sorry about that for anybody who I was planning to see. The thing I wanted to talk about is these tariffs, man, and the economy. So Trump issued his global tariff regime, which people keep calling them reciprocal tariffs. It's important to note, first of all, these are not reciprocal. These are based on the trade deficit that the U.S. has with other economies. So there's nothing like reciprocal about that. And tariffs in response to a trade deficit is like kind of bananas. Like that doesn't really make sense. So we're calling them reciprocal, but they're not reciprocal. That's a branding thing that Trump did. And then we're calling them tariffs, but tariffs have certain functions that are not why they're being used here. Like these are sanctions. This is global economic sanctions because they're coercive, right? This is not about building up a particular sector of the economy, although they use manufacturing as a kind of excuse for this stuff. And so it's really sanctions. We're talking about a global sanctions regime. Now, as I'm saying this, people probably heard that the markets, the bond market, the stock market fucking crashed. The bond markets crashed, and temporarily, and it's because the world kind of revolted at Trump's imposition of this unprecedented global tariff thing, right? So it was 10% for the world, more for other countries, and then for some countries, and then for China, it was 54% tariffs, right? I want to circle back to that because that's the big, very worrying thing here. So Trump issued all these tariffs and it shocked the markets. It shocked everybody. There was a global revolt, right? And that global revolt took the immediate form of selling off treasuries en masse. And so this increased bond yields, which crashed the prices of bonds. This is how the bond market works, right? And then Trump said,
markets that persuaded you to reverse course?
I was watching the bond market. The bond market is very tricky. I was watching it, but if you look at it now, it's beautiful. The bond market right now is beautiful. But yeah, I saw last night where people were getting a little queasy. I think everything had. Well, the big move wasn't what I did today. The big move was what I did on Liberation Day.
He was watching the bond markets closely. Watching the bond markets crash made him basically capitulate. So there was a kind of revolt, and he responded accordingly. But he responded with this 90-day suspension of the tariffs application. So like basically a cooling off period. This is pretty fucked up. So the cooling off period, I think he's trying to manage the stock market and the bond market, which is, people talk about like these markets being tied to the real economy or not. They're vibes based. It's about, those markets are about people's confidence in the U.S. economy and U.S. decision making, and vibes are connected to reality, but it's not like a one-to-one linear thing. So Trump is trying to manage the vibes by having this 90-day cooling off period, but he's still imposing the tariffs. This whole global regime thing is still happening, right? And that's the concern, because this tariff regime, as people started frantically analyzing it the past couple of weeks, is going to cause a recession. A global recession, but a recession in the U.S. as well. People are going to eat shit. The working class is going to eat shit. This still is driving the world toward like more nationalist blocks and higher military spending, which means correspondingly less social welfare spending, which in turn means a resurgent far right sort of everywhere, right? So this is the sort of global nightmare that's being fueled by all of this stuff. And that's like what I think is really important not to lose sight of. But in the meantime, Trump does care. And so all of that shit's going to happen. It is happening. But Trump wants to manage the vibes part. He doesn't want the markets to crash, right? So I had a piece in Labor Notes recently. I wrote specifically that like the oligarchs want a recession. And the argument there, you should read the piece, but the argument there was that the oligarchs who are around Trump, the Mark Andreessens, the Peter Thiels, right? These guys, even the Bezoses, these guys don't need a healthy national economy in order to keep number go up, in order to keep getting richer. And you saw that with the market crash when Trump announced his tariff plans. As soon as he suspended those tariff plans, all of the world's 10 richest people got like orders of magnitude richer. There's a little chart that's going around that shows it. Like, the world's eating shit and they keep getting richer. And this is my point, is like, these billionaires don't make money through making shit or through building societal infrastructure or national infrastructure even. You know, they make money through speculation, through gambling, right? Or through state patronage, or through predatory private equity, right? Which is a destructive force. And so, like, those are the ways they make money. Those are disconnected from the, GDP growth. Those are disconnected from questions about full employment. So, like, they get richer regardless of whether the economy is doing well or not. But the working class needs the economy to do well in order to prosper, in order to not turn to the far right even, right? So that's a huge fucking problem. And so Trump is managing the markets. That's what this 90-day pause is. But the thing that is very concerning is how he's managing this. So Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, these are his Treasury and Commerce secretaries, Trump's. They sat down when Trump saw the bond market crashing, and they're like, oh, we need to manage this, so let's do the 90-day pause. The way that they did the 90-day pause was to craft a Truth Social tweet blame-shifting China for all of this, right? And Stephen Miller, the White House advisor, who's also a fucking, like, avowed racist, like, he was on the Sunday shows, and he was also pinning all of this on China ultimately, even before this new pivot from Trump. So China was going to be the target from the start, disproportionately of the global tariff regime. That's why they had 54% tariffs, right? Where most countries got only 10%. And the Truth Social post is just dripping with vitriol, saying China's screwing us, China's a threat. And this is dealing with it's the national securitization of the tariffs, which is that's nothing new. But Lutnick said that Scott Bessent, and Trump sat together and crafted that Trump Truth Social tweet. So the anti-China pivot was a bit of an improvisation, it sounds like, but it was an improvisation that they sort of crafted strategically together on the spot. It's Trump's words, I guess. But the idea is that, like, they are trying to say that the world can get a deal and get their individual countries' tariffs relieved if they help expunge China from the global economy, if they can help the American primacy project of kneecapping China, right? This is the bargain that's on the table right now. And this is not going to work. There's onesie-twosie countries that might find this enticing on some level, especially if they're run by, like, reactionary governments, But this shit is not going to work. And, like, America doesn't have the cards to be doing what it's doing on economic policy, on economic statecraft, especially on Asia, especially relative to China, So, like, Adam Posen had a piece in Foreign Affairs where he basically made this same argument. I've been arguing this for years, but it's like America doesn't have the cards to do what it's trying to do, and there's going to be a price, there's going to be a cost of that, And so basically, like, if you look at the situation rationally, the U.S. market makes up 15% of Chinese exports. That's if China lost that access to the U.S. completely, it would still be a powerhouse. That would be a decline in growth rates, of course, but it's manageable. And it becomes more manageable as China and other countries diversify away from the United States. And that's the big trend that seems to kind of be happening. So in the Biden years and in Trump 1.0 years, there was a lot of talk about economic diversification as the subtext being like diversification away from China. And that's not the diversification anymore that is the priority. The priority is to diversify away from the US. So like on the one hand, you could issue retaliatory tariffs, and like Singapore's prime minister said like they're not going to, and he gave a very good set of sober comments.
The US is doing now is not reform. It is rejecting the very system it created.
Singapore depends on a kind of open international order. If it started imposing retaliatory tariffs against Trump, it would disavow the order that they need in order to exist and thrive. So they're not going to issue retaliatory tariffs. But what they are going to do is seek out new trading partners, new forms of financial architecture and economic architecture. And so you're going to see new pushes for FTAs, new supply chains, new economic partnerships that route around the US, the search for new markets. That's the thing, right? And so China, Japan, South Korea, not friends.
China, Japan, and South Korea held the first trade talks in 5 years on Sunday, amid concerns over US President Donald Trump's import tariffs. The three Asian manufacturing giants agreed to, quote, closely cooperate for a comprehensive and high-level talks to improve free trade in the region. That's according to a statement released after the meeting. Trade ministers from the three nations met ahead of Trump's planned announcement on Wednesday of more tariffs in what he calls, quote, Liberation Day.
To coordinate the response to Trump's tariffs, which itself is kind of a signal, but the bigger signal is that those three countries, again, not friends, they are pushing forward with trying to conclude an FTA, a free trade agreement. That would be a major accomplishment, but also a major symbol of a kind of international order that is moving on past the US, you know? And this is all being driven, mind you, by America's commitment to primacy in the form of Trump's tariffs, you know? It's this insistence on keeping dollar primacy while rebalancing trade deficits and trying to reshore manufacturing. That's a series of contradictions. Those things cannot go together. But the fact that like only 15% of China's exports go to the US not only means that it's manageable, but like what in the Sino-US partnership generally, China gets money from the US. Money is fungible, money is replaceable. America gets goods and services from China that it does not get elsewhere, that it does not make itself. You know, one of many examples is the critical minerals inputs to US weapons, right? A lot of US missiles and aircraft rely on parts and materials from China, sourced from China, right? And so like even the American warfighting apparatus, to say nothing of like vacuum cleaners and televisions and shit, involves China, requires China. It produces stuff that China produces stuff that America uses and needs. But America doesn't produce stuff that China needs, right? So there is an imbalance. And what this means is that there's like a cost exchange ratio in economic warfare that favors China and that harms the US. So the more the US escalates the economic war with China, the more it hurts America more than China. So the longer it goes on and the more it escalates, the more of a disadvantage America has. And that's separate from the question of global economic ordering and how other states are going to respond, given that everybody sees America as a revisionist power. And that's not only accurate, but like Singapore's prime minister like has actively been saying that, right? Which is, again, brave new world shit. Like people were not talking like this until recently. Like you couldn't have imagined this a couple years ago, you know? So the thing that concerns me right now is like, you know, you go back to 1930, the Smoot-Hawley tariff Act in the U.S. that they threw up these protective tariff barriers, and Imperial Japan looked at that and got freaked out because it was an export-based economy. Imperial Japan was, right? The Smoot-Hawley tariffs accelerated an arms race in global tariffs in the 1930s. Not only did that worsen the Great Depression, but Imperial Japan saw that, and their solution was more empire, basically. Like, they needed to become autarkic. And so part of that was the conquest of not just Korea, but China, right? And the larger Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And so we get the Pacific War. So like World War II is downstream of a global protectionist mood, the tariff barriers. I'm not saying tariffs caused World War II, but it's like a huge part of the story, you know? And so in the context of Sino-US relations today, this is something that is like actively on my mind, because I think the MAGA project, and I've said this and we argued this in the Rivalry Peril in a certain way, the MAGA project, it needs perpetual crisis with an external great power. You need like ethno-nationalism, the consolidation of a national bloc, especially an ethno-nationalist bloc. It requires an enemy to fuse it. And geopolitical rivalry has this tendency to increase the strength of reactionary political demagogues. It's a very easy thing to demagogue. It justifies austerity and diverting social spending into military spending and all of that, right? So that's concerning here. I'm looking at this situation and I see that the Defense Department is still, it's going to be getting, Trump is promoting $1 trillion budget for the military now, right? That $1 trillion budget is not to fight cartels. It's not about fentanyl. You don't need F-22s and like, you know, Boeing's latest 6th generation fighter. You don't need that stuff to fight cartels. You need that stuff to fight a great power enemy. Who's the only game in town for high-tech war fighting? It's China. And that's why you see the Silicon Valley defense industrial bros, the Palantir executives, these guys, they are actively talking about us being in war with China already. China's going to war with us already.
But I think one of the things, you know, China knows they're at war. The question is, we kind of equivocate on it as a peace-loving nation.
They have insane threat inflation. They have an insane misperception of China, right? And the China threat. But that's because it fuels their bottom line. And that's what the China hawks in the Trump administration, to a man, they all want. They want to optimize for war with China, and they need to build that military. And you can't do that in a benign strategic environment, you know? And Bridge Colby, who I talked about on the pod occasionally, you know, he calls this, like, he wants an anti-hegemonic coalition in Asia, or counter-hegemonic coalition in Asia. That's a misnomer. That's the wrong term for it. But he wants to unify smaller countries in Asia. He wants to unify the American public behind this anti-China project. And that facilitates the white nationalist social order. And it's not going to happen. Like, you can't have that kind of counter-hegemonic coalition in a world where we're alienating everybody. That's fucking impossible. But that's what they want. And so, like, these guys are on wax. They're on the record. They've been writing in like foreign affairs and stuff for years. They want a hard break. Trump's China people. They want a hard break from China. And so Trump issued 10% tariffs on China in January. Then when he rolled out his global tariff plan of sanctions on everybody, it's 54% tariffs, right? Now, in conjunction with the cooling off period for applying all these global tariffs, he announced 104% tariffs on China. And then he has signaled that he's foreshadowed that he'll go to 125% tariffs on China. And it really feels like they are goading China. They're trying to like entice China into escalating, into reactions that they can use to demagogue. to continue consolidating this sort of national security, ethno-nationalist project, to continue feeding the venture capital machine, which is only plowing money into defense and AI and like basically nothing else. So they need this war with China shit. And that's the world that we're sort of like living in and headed toward, right? So they need crisis. No, I don't think anybody wants World War III, but they're trying to be too clever by half. Like, they want the crisis, and they want to like live in the crisis with China. They want geopolitical confrontation. And Trump's tariffs on China are not going away anytime soon. They're like, or at all. I think they're here to stay, right? And his China hawks love it because they want a hard break from China. And that goes part and parcel with the purge of brown and yellow folks from the country, the purge of leftists from the country, you know, and fueling and then pouring all of our goddamn money into the war machine. I need to get to class. But I guess to sum things up, tariffs are here to stay on China. They are going to escalate geopolitical tension with China. They're trying to be used to extort friendly countries to work with us to purge China basically from the global economy. And that bet is going to fail spectacularly. And I'm worried about what that means, like how the U.S. is going to respond when other countries start building economic architecture without the U.S. Because part of U.S. foreign policy on the low-key side for decades has been preventing, especially in East Asia, economic architecture that would exclude the U.S. But now it has to happen. There's no other way. So some countries will issue retaliatory tariffs and there will be a more protectionist mood. But there's also going to be an alternative economic order, and we're starting to see the beginnings of that be born. How will America react? And will the sort of Smoot-Hawley tariffs of, you know, like the 1930s coming back, is that going to lead to World War III in the way that tariffs led to World War II once upon a time? I am concerned, dude. I'll spend more time on this, but I need to go right now. All right, peace.